This happened in the fall of 2021, just a few days after my 28th birthday. I was living alone in a modest, third-floor apartment on the outskirts of Seattle. It was the kind of older brick building where you could hear the faint hum of traffic from the interstate and the occasional creak of your neighbors shifting around upstairs. The night before my actual birthday, I had driven out to the suburbs to have dinner with my parents and my two younger brothers. It was a completely normal, comforting evening. We ate at an Italian place downtown, caught up on work, and laughed about stupid childhood memories. After dinner, we headed back to my parents' house for cake. But right after I blew out the candles, my dad set his fork down, looked at me with an uncharacteristically pale expression, and asked me to join him in his study down the hall. I thought he just wanted to talk about my career or hand me a quiet birthday check. But when he closed the heavy wooden door behind us and turned the lock, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The room felt cold. He sat behind his desk, leaned forward until his knuckles turned white against the mahogany, and told me something that sounded completely detached from reality. He said that for 4 generations, every firstborn man in our family received a visitor during the week of their 28th birthday. He called him Benny the Flesh Man. According to my dad, this figure would arrive at exactly 3:28 in the morning, and surviving the encounter required following an exact set of rules. I honestly thought it was an elaborate, twisted joke. But my dad's hands were trembling as he laid out the conditions. Rule 1. When he arrives, you will hear 3 rapid knocks, a distinct 2-second silence, and then 2 heavy, slow thuds against the wood. You have to open the door and invite him in. If you ignore him, he will find his own way inside anyway, and you will not have the benefit of his temporary politeness. Rule 2. The moment he steps over the threshold, he will try to shake your hand. You must not make skin-to-skin contact with him under any circumstance. Instead, immediately offer him a cup of coffee. He will refuse. The second he refuses, you must walk to the sink and bring him a glass of tap water without him asking for it. If he has to ask, the visit ends immediately. Rule 3. At exactly 4:28 a.m. after finishing the water, he will stand up and politely ask to use your bathroom. You must look him in the eyes and say no. No matter what he says, no matter how angry he gets, do not give him permission. If you give in, he will ask you to show him down the hall. And you will never walk out of that bathroom. Rule 4. If you hold your ground, he will accept it, walk to the exit, and wish you a happy birthday. You must give him a quiet, appreciative nod, but you must never say thank you. Before we left the study, my dad gripped my shoulders with an intensity that genuinely terrified me. He told me to cancel every plan I had for the rest of the week and stay entirely alone. He warned me that if anyone outside our bloodline was present when Benny arrived, he would claim them as a host gift. He brought up my Uncle Bill, who had supposedly died in a car wreck when I was 4. My dad looked me in the eyes and whispered that there was no car crash. They just found Bill's empty skin in his master bathroom. I drove back to my apartment the next morning. In the bright daylight, the whole thing felt absurd. I rationalized it as some bizarre family myth or an early sign of mental decline in my dad. For the first 4 days, nothing happened. I stayed up late playing video games and watching TV, half amused by my own paranoia. But on the 5th night, as the clock on my microwave ticked toward early morning, an inexplicable, suffocating dread settled into my chest. At 3:27 a.m. I was sitting on my sofa, staring at the digital clock on the wall. I let out a nervous chuckle, whispering to myself that it was all just a story. Then at 3:28 on the dot, the silence shattered. Rap, rap, rap. A dead 2-second pause. Thud, thud. My stomach dropped through the floor. The sound was so heavy it vibrated the wooden floorboards beneath my bare feet. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead, and crept toward the entryway. I leaned forward and looked through the peephole. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was a ridiculously tall, gaunt man wearing an oversized, threadbare brown overcoat. The fabric hung off his shoulders like a sheet thrown over a broomstick, and the sleeves drooped completely past his wrists. My hands shook so hard I could barely turn the deadbolt. I pulled the door open. "Ha-ho, Lucas, my boy. Good to see ya, good to see ya," a voice grated from his throat. It sounded dry and raspy, like dry leaves scraping against concrete. "May I come in?" Yeah. Please come in," I stammered. His lips curled upward, stretching unnaturally far back across gray, uneven teeth. "Excellent. I'm Benny. Nice to meet ya, kiddo." He thrust his right arm forward, extending a pale, skeletal hand. The skin on his fingers looked dry and papery, stretched tight over long, sharp bones. "Actually, can I offer you a cup of coffee, Benny?" I blurted out, taking half a step backward. His hand froze. He lowered his arm slowly and erupted into a loud, wet, wheezing laugh that echoed down the quiet hallway. "Coffee?" he barked, practically bending over at the waist. "Why, it's 3 a.m, my boy. No. I couldn't possibly." He shuffled into my living room. His gait was sickeningly unnatural. His torso swayed side to side as if his upper half wasn't properly attached to his hips. He drifted toward my small kitchen table and dropped into one of the chairs. As he sat, a smell hit me. It was a faint, sickening odor of copper, stagnant water, and spoiled meat. I forced my legs toward the cupboard. "Let me grab you a glass of water, Benny?" "Why, that would be swell, Lucas. Such a polite young man." I filled a tumbler from the tap and brought it over, setting it down gently. His legs were so abnormally long that his knees pressed against the underside of the tabletop. For the next hour, he sipped the water and made disjointed, mundane small talk about the weather and my job. Every 10 minutes or so, he would casually reach out to pat my shoulder or lean in to tap my knee, but I forced myself to shift away or stand up under the guise of pacing. Every time I dodged his touch, his smile only widened, as if he found my panic entertaining. Then the stove clock shifted to 4:28 a.m. Benny drained the last drop of water, stood up, and looked directly into my eyes. "Lucas, my boy, could I please use your restroom?" The room felt entirely devoid of air. "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "No, I'd prefer it if you didn't." The smile vanished instantly from his face. His jaw went slack, and he stared blankly at the tan tile floor for what felt like an eternity. "Was your mother around when you were a boy?" he asked softly. "Yes," I replied, my pulse hammering in my throat. "Why?" "Well, I just couldn't imagine." He trailed off, suddenly grabbing the empty glass from the table and hurling it with terrifying force. It shattered against the drywall inches from my ear, spraying shards across my neck. I couldn't imagine such a rude, inconsiderate little piece of shit having a mother to raise him. He flew into a frenzy. He slammed his fists onto my kitchen table with enough force to splinter the wood, before ripping open my cabinets and hurling plates, mugs, and bowls across the room. White porcelain exploded against the refrigerator and walls while he muttered violently under his breath, "I just wanted to use the bathroom. Why won't you let me use the bathroom?" After shredding the room, he suddenly stopped. He strode over and leaned down until his face was barely 3 inches from mine. The stench radiating from his pores was overwhelming. "Now I'm going to ask you one last time," he hissed through clenched teeth. I please use your bathroom?" Every instinct told me to give up, to let him have his way just to make the nightmare stop. But my dad's voice echoed in my head. "No, you may not use my bathroom, Benny," I said, holding his dead stare. "I'm sorry." For 3 agonizing seconds, pure malice flared in his eyes. Then, like a switch had been flipped, his posture loosened. The wide, sickening smile stretched across his cheeks once more. "Very well, Lucas. Very well. I must be getting along then. It's been a lovely visit, but I am out of time." I walked him to the front door, my chest aching from the adrenaline. He turned around in the doorway, extended his hand one final time and said, "One last thing, my boy. A very, very happy birthday." I kept both hands buried deep in my pockets and gave him a single, silent nod. He turned toward the hall. I let out a long, trembling breath, believing the ordeal was finally over. Then I heard footsteps approaching from the stairs. It was Roger, my next-door neighbor. He stood in the hallway in his flannel pajama pants, blinking groggily. "Hey, Lucas? Is everything okay?" I heard all this glass breaking and screaming. Roger stopped dead when he saw the towering figure in the brown overcoat. Benny turned back to look at me over his shoulder. His smile stretched impossibly wider. "Ah, you shouldn't have," Benny whispered. Before I could scream or move, Benny reached up to his own jawline. With a sickening, wet tearing sound, he grabbed the skin beneath his chin and pulled it upward. It peeled away from his face like wet latex, revealing a mass of raw, glistening red muscle underneath. He rapidly stripped the dried, graying flesh from his neck, arms, and torso, letting the discarded heap fall to the hallway carpet. Roger opened his mouth to scream, but the sound was abruptly cut short as the raw figure lunged forward. I stood frozen behind my cracked door, paralyzed by a level of primal terror I didn't know a human mind could endure. The sounds of wet tearing, breaking cartilage, and muffled choking lasted for less than 2 minutes. When the figure finally turned back toward me, it gave me one last, polite nod. It was wearing Roger. The pale, familiar skin of my neighbor hung loosely over the towering muscle frame, dripping dark red onto the carpet. The entity turned and stepped quietly down the stairwell, disappearing into the night. Across the hall, what was left of Roger lay slumped against the baseboard, a discarded, unrecognizable heap of bone and sinew. I never went back to that apartment. I packed whatever fit into my car the following morning and moved across the country, changing my number and cutting off contact with almost everyone I knew. It's been years since that night, but every time late October rolls around, I find myself completely unable to sleep. Whenever the clock creeps past 3 in the morning, every floorboard creak outside my door makes my chest seize up. Because deep down, I know my younger brother turns 28 next year and I don't know if he'll have the strength to say no. This happened back in the late summer of 2021, at a run-down roadside diner sitting on an empty stretch of highway roughly 50 miles outside of Reno. If you've ever driven through the high desert at night, you know the kind of place I'm talking about. Miles of pitch-black asphalt, dead silence, and zero cell reception until you hit the tiny inexplicable pocket of service right in our gravel parking lot. The diner was supposed to be a rest stop for long-haul truckers, but even they rarely pulled in. When men who survive entirely on stale coffee and beef jerky take one look at your neon sign and decide to keep driving into the dark, you know your establishment is failing. I didn't care much at first. I took the line cook job for the absolute solitude. The owner, a man named Ricky, had inherited the building from his late father. He was an odd, jittery guy who literally lived in the back office, no car, no family, just an unhealthy obsession with keeping the doors open. When the pandemic hit, whatever thin grip Ricky had on reality began to snap. Our customer count dropped from a dozen a day to maybe one if we were lucky. Paychecks stopped clearing. On 3 separate occasions, I walked into the kitchen at dawn to find the heavy smell of unlit gas pooling in the air and Ricky standing over the flat top, thumbing a cheap plastic lighter. Another time, I had to physically wrestle a rusted red jerrycan away from him by the grease trap. He was drowning in desperation. Then, around mid-August, his entire demeanor flipped overnight. I arrived at 5 in the morning to find the kitchen smelling intensely of industrial bleach. Ricky was sitting on a counter, swinging his legs, whistling a tune I didn't recognize. His bloodshot eyes were wide, sunken, and manic. "I fixed it, Don," he whispered, staring straight past me into the empty dining room. "Our woes are over. The clean slate is here. You're real, right, Don?" He reached out toward my face with trembling fingers. I stepped back, utterly unnerved, telling him to back off. He didn't drop the unnerving grin. Instead, he handed me a mop and told me we had a VIP guest arriving that evening, and the restaurant had to be spotless. We cleaned for 16 hours straight in the suffocating heat. No actual cars passed. No travelers pulled in. By 9 o'clock that night, my shift was long over and every muscle in my back was screaming. I grabbed my backpack and headed for the glass double doors. A cold hand clamped down hard onto my shoulder. I turned. Ricky's manic smile was completely gone. His face was blank, his eyes utterly dead. "He's coming," Ricky said. His voice was a flat monotone. "Let go of me, man. I'm going home." Ricky's grip tightened with a strength that felt impossible for a guy his size. "Trust me, Don, you'll want to see this. And if you try to walk out that door right now, I will kill you." He wasn't yelling. He wasn't shaking. He said it with the quiet certainty of someone stating a simple fact. I forced a nervous chuckle, waiting for him to break, but his pupils didn't even flicker. A cold knot tightened in the pit of my stomach. Realizing I was 50 miles from help, trapped with an unhinged man, I slowly set my bag down and backed behind the register. For the next 2 hours, Ricky stood motionless against the front window, hands folded behind his back, staring into the pitch-black desert. By 11:30, the dead silence in the diner was deafening. The only sound was the low, electric hum of the fluorescent tubes overhead. I decided to make a break from my car. I quietly reached for the metal latch of the front door. Ricky's hand shot across the frame and locked around my wrist like a vice. Before I could yell, he raised his other arm, pointing out into the vast, dark emptiness beyond our parking lot. "He's here." At first I saw nothing. Just the red glow of our neon sign bleeding into the blackness. But then, about 200 yards out, something shifted. A figure was walking up the middle of the empty highway. As it passed beneath the dim perimeter floodlight, my breath caught in my throat. The proportions were entirely wrong. The man was easily 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall, wearing an impeccably tailored, dust-free blue suit. His stride was unnaturally smooth, his impossibly long arms swinging loosely at his sides. In his right hand he held a sleek, matte black briefcase. Ricky shoved me aside and pulled the door wide open. When the man stepped inside, the temperature in the foyer seemed to plummet. A suffocating stench hit us immediately, a rancid mixture of scorched electronics, bleach, and something sweet and decaying. His head brushed the acoustic ceiling tiles. His skin was pale, devoid of pores or wrinkles, pulled so tightly over his high cheekbones that it looked artificial. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't speak. He simply walked to the first booth, set the briefcase flat on the laminated table and popped the latches. The sound of those metal clips echoing through the quiet diner made the hairs on my arms stand straight up. He lifted the lid. Sitting inside, nestled against velvet foam, was a wet, pulsating mass of fibrous, pale pink flesh. It looked like a cluster of raw muscle tissue, threaded with thick, dark veins that visibly expanded and contracted in a rhythmic, shallow beat. The vapor rising from it burned my nostrils like ammonia. My knees went weak. I opened my mouth to shout, but Ricky violently stomped his boot onto mine, cutting me off. "I'll take that," Ricky said, his voice trembling with a frantic, eager reverence. With his bare hands, Ricky scooped the warm, wet thing out of the case. Dark fluid dripped onto the linoleum with heavy, sickening thuds. He carried it back to the flat-top grill and dropped it onto the iron. The moment it hit the heat, it didn't sizzle. It hissed. A sharp, high-pitched whistling sound filled the kitchen, dozens of tiny, shrieking frequencies layered on top of each other, sounding horribly like muffled screams. Ricky stood over it with a metal spatula, humming softly, inhaling the chemical smoke as the meat shrank and blackened into a dense, leathery slab. "Never ask them about the meat, Don," Ricky muttered under his breath without looking at me. "They're our new clientele." When it was done, Ricky placed the charred mass onto a ceramic plate and brought it out. The tall man didn't eat it. He reached out with pale, elongated fingers, picked up the hot meat and sealed it back inside his briefcase. Then the man reached into his jacket, pulled out 3 crisp, banded stacks of $100 bills, and dropped them onto the table. Without uttering a single syllable, he turned around, ducked beneath the doorframe and walked out into the desert darkness. Within seconds the night swallowed him whole. I quit coming in for the morning prep, but I couldn't afford to leave the job entirely. That was months ago. Ricky wasn't lying about our new clientele. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, around midnight, the tall men in the blue suits walk out of the dark desert, carrying their locked briefcases. Ricky cooks their screaming meat, takes the stacks of clean cash, and never asks a single question. I try to keep my head down. I try to pretend I don't hear the scratching beneath the kitchen floorboards or notice the strange metallic insects crawling along the baseboards. But lately, when I'm driving home down that 50-mile stretch of pitch-black highway, I catch myself looking in my rearview mirror. Because sometimes, way back on the edge of the asphalt where my headlights can't reach, I swear I can see very tall, dark silhouettes keeping pace with my car. This happened back in the summer of 2021, right after school had let out for the year. I remember it was an uncomfortably humid Tuesday afternoon, and my house was completely quiet. My mom was downstairs doing laundry, and I was finally tackling a chore I'd been avoiding for months, cleaning my bedroom. If you're anything like me, you let things pile up until your room looks like a disaster zone. My desk was buried under old worksheets, half-empty water bottles, and random cords. But the worst part was the bookshelf in the corner. It was packed with old middle school textbooks shoved horizontally between novels, yellowing loose-leaf papers, and a thick layer of gray dust that made me cough every time I moved something. I started with the very top shelf, dragging a small trash bin over to clear out the junk. As I pulled down a heavy stack of old encyclopedias, something small and solid slipped out from behind the wood and hit the carpet with a dull thud. I bent down and picked it up. It was a small, pocket-sized black notebook with a smooth faux leather cover. There was no title printed on the front, no author name on the spine, nothing except a tiny, crude white smiley face drawn in the bottom right corner. I figured it was just some old diary from when I was 10 that had fallen behind the shelf. I wiped the dust off with my sleeve and opened the front cover. On the first page, printed in standard, clean block letters, were the words, "A Book of Jokes." I let out a quiet laugh. The first few pages were just dumb, generic playground jokes you'd find in a dollar store novelty book. Why did the chicken cross the road? To get to the other side. What do you call a sleeping dinosaur? A dino snore. I flipped through a few more pages, smiling at how ridiculous they were. But around the 5th page, the printed text abruptly stopped. The rest of the pages were handwritten in thick, scratchy black ink, as if someone had pressed down way too hard with a fountain pen. The handwriting was erratic, slanting heavily to the left. The next line read, "What do you call someone who never answers when you call their name?" I turned the page. "Someone who doesn't know you're there." I frowned. It felt uncomfortably blunt, lacking any punchline. Shrugging it off, I turned the page again to see what else was scribbled in there. "Why shouldn't you look under your bed at night?" I flipped over to the answer. "Because sometimes something is already looking at you." A cold, uneasy chill ran down my neck. Even though I knew it was just stupid edgelord graffiti, the atmosphere in the room suddenly felt heavier. I reflexively glanced down toward the gap between my bed frame and the floor. The shadows were deep, but it was just empty carpet and a pair of discarded socks. "Okay, definitely weird," I muttered to myself, closing the book with a firm snap. I tossed it onto my cleared desk, grabbed a duster, and went back to sorting out my closet. About 10 minutes passed in complete silence, until a sharp thud echoed right behind me. I spun around. The black book was lying face down on the hardwood floor. I froze, staring at it. My desk was completely flat, and there wasn't a draft in the room. The window was shut tight against the summer heat. There was no physical way it could have slid off on its own. I walked over, picked it up, and turned it over. My stomach tightened. The book wasn't closed anymore. It was open to a page in the exact middle of the binding, wet ink gleaming under my desk lamp. "What did you forget?" My thumb trembled as I turned to the next page. "To close the door." Slowly, I turned my head toward the hallway. My bedroom door, which I always keep shut and latched, was swinging wide open into the dark corridor. I felt a heavy knot twist in my gut. I distinctly remembered shutting it when I started cleaning. I walked over, grabbed the brass handle, and pulled it shut, turning the lock with a loud, distinct click. Before I could even take a step back toward my desk, 3 solid raps echoed through the room. Knock, knock, knock. The sound didn't come from the hallway. It came from deep inside the wooden wardrobe standing against the far wall. My breath hitched in my throat. I stood frozen in the center of the room, my eyes locked on the double wardrobe doors. A second later, 3 more heavy, deliberate knocks rattled the thin wood frame. Heart pounding against my ribs, I grabbed a heavy metal ruler off my desk, crept across the floorboards, and yanked both doors open at once. Nothing. Just my jackets hanging quietly in a row, a stack of winter blankets, and an empty shoebox. I swept the clothes aside and checked every dark corner. It was completely empty. I let out a shaky breath, telling myself the old wood was just expanding in the summer humidity. But when I turned back around, all the air left my lungs. The black book was sitting directly in the center of my neatly made bed. I hadn't put it there. I hadn't moved it from the desk. And right before my eyes, in the pale light of the afternoon, the pages began to flip slowly by themselves. Flutter, flutter, flutter. They came to a sudden halt near the back. Paralyzed by raw adrenaline, I leaned in just enough to read the fresh, wet words written on the paper. Knock, knock. As I stared, horrified, a new line of ink bled through the page beneath it, appearing letter by letter as if drawn by an invisible hand. Who's there? Panic completely took over. I slammed the book shut, grabbed an opaque plastic grocery bag, shoved the book inside, and ran out of the house. I walked 4 blocks down the street to the local park, took the heavy plastic bag and shoved it deep to the bottom of an overflowing public dumpster, burying it beneath layers of rank household trash. When I finally walked back into my house and climbed the stairs to my room, a deep sense of relief washed over me. I pushed open my bedroom door, eager to put the whole bizarre afternoon behind me. Sitting squarely in the middle of my clean desk was the small black book. A cold wave of dread washed over my entire body. I hadn't touched the dumpster. Nobody had followed me. I approached the desk with shaking hands and forced the cover open. The first page had completely changed. The title, A Book of Jokes, was gone. In its place, etched in jagged, frantic strokes, were 2 words. Let's play. I slammed it shut, terrified of saying anything to my mom because I knew how insane it sounded. That night, I tried to convince myself it was an elaborate, terrifying prank played by a friend. But around 2:15 a.m., I was violently pulled from a light sleep by the dry, rhythmic rustling of paper. Flip, flip, flip. I opened my eyes, staring into the pitch darkness. The faint glow from the streetlights outside illuminated the desk. The pages were turning on their own, one after another, in the dead silence of the room. My phone buzzed sharply on my nightstand, lighting up the ceiling. With trembling fingers, I unlocked the screen. It was a text from an unknown number. Knock knock. My heart was hammering against my chest. A second notification immediately followed. Who's there? Then a third. Look behind you. I gripped the bedsheets, paralyzed with fear. I refused to turn around toward the empty space behind my pillow. A fourth message lit up the display. You don't have to look. The second I read those words, a low, wet, rasping wheeze leaked out from the darkness directly underneath my mattress. It sounded like an old man trying to laugh through a throat full of fluid. I didn't sleep a single second for the rest of the night, sitting bolt upright with my back pressed flat against the wall until the sun finally broke through the blinds. The next morning, I couldn't carry the fear alone anymore. I grabbed the book and brought it down to the kitchen. My mom was brewing coffee, completely oblivious. When I told her what had happened, she initially laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke. But when I told her I had thrown it in a public dumpster 4 blocks away and it returned to my desk, her smile vanished. She took the book and flipped through it. Sweetheart, there's nothing in here. It's totally blank. I leaned over her shoulder and my heart sank. Every single page front to back was stark, clean white. The ink, the handwriting, the jokes, everything was completely gone. You're just stressed from finals, she said softly, putting the book on the counter. Get some rest today. I wanted so badly to believe her. But that afternoon, when I walked back up to my room, the book wasn't in the kitchen anymore. It was lying wide open on my bedroom floor. In the center of the page was a single, freshly inked sentence. Your mom doesn't believe you. I sprinted back downstairs, grabbing the book to shove it in her face, but the moment she looked at it, the ink vanished into thin air again. She looked at me with genuine, deep concern, asking if I needed to see a doctor. That evening, I couldn't bear having it near me. I placed the book squarely in the middle of the upstairs hallway floor, shut my heavy bedroom door, locked it, and wedged a heavy wooden desk chair firmly under the handle. Around midnight, a faint, agonizing sound began outside my room. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Something was being dragged inch by inch across the hardwood flooring. Then absolute silence. I slowly pulled the chair away and cracked the door open an inch. The black book was resting directly against my doorframe, mere millimeters from my toes. I picked it up, my hands visibly shaking. A new riddle was scrawled across the paper. Why did the book come back? I turned the page. Because you left something behind. Tucked inside the back binding was the edge of a glossy 4x6 photograph. I slowly pulled it out and the air froze in my lungs. It was a crystal clear picture of my bedroom taken from the angle of my doorway. My bed, my desk, my wardrobe, and standing right in the center was me facing away from the camera. But my posture in the photo was completely wrong. The figure's limbs were impossibly thin, and its neck was twisted at an unnatural, broken angle. Standing directly in the shadows behind the figure was a towering, pitch-black silhouette whose head scraped against the ceiling. I flipped the photo over. Written on the back was a single word: yesterday. I dropped the photograph in utter terror. When I looked down to pick it back up, The towering silhouette in the background was gone from the print, leaving only the warped version of me standing alone in the dark. I barely survived the next day. I went to school just to get out of that house, but the paranoia was eating me alive. Every shadow looked like a tall figure. Every floorboard creak sounded like footsteps. When the final bell rang at 3 p.m., I walked to my locker to grab my backpack. When I swung the metal door open, sitting right on top of my binders was the small black book. Sticking out from the top was a second photograph. This one was shot from a low, upward angle taken from directly underneath my bed while I was sleeping, looking up past the edge of the mattress at my resting face. On the back were 4 words in that same wet, jagged handwriting. "You didn't see me." I slammed the locker shut, sprinted all the way home, and burst through the front door in tears. When I walked into the kitchen, I showed my mom the photographs. This time the images didn't vanish. Her face drained of all color, her hands visibly trembling as she looked at the angle taken from under my bed. "We're getting rid of this right now," she whispered, her voice cracking. She grabbed an old steel toolbox from the garage, shoved the book and the photos inside, padlocked the latch, and drove it directly to the regional industrial waste dump, throwing the entire locked box into a massive commercial compactor. When she came back, we sat downstairs in the living room with every single light in the house turned on. Hours passed. For the first time all week, the oppressive weight in the air felt like it was lifting. We thought it was finally over. At 11:30 p.m., heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed across the floorboards directly above our heads. Creak, creak, creak. My mom and I froze, our eyes locked on the ceiling. "It's just the house settling," she whispered, though her trembling voice betrayed her. Then, 3 deafening pounds shook the ceiling directly from my bedroom. Thud, thud, thud. My mom stood up, walking toward the base of the stairs. "Stay here," she told me. "Mom, don't," I begged, grabbing her arm. Suddenly, a voice echoed down from the dark landing at the top of the stairs. It was sweet, clear, and sounded identically like my mother's voice. "Who's there?" My mom went entirely pale, her jaw trembling. She hadn't opened her mouth. The voice called out again from the shadows above, louder and unnaturally distorted. "Who's there?" "Don't answer it," I sobbed quietly. A loud pop echoed from the breaker box, and every single light in the house died, plunging us into total, suffocating darkness. Through the blackness, we heard slow, heavy steps descending the wooden staircase. Step, step, step. The footsteps stopped right at the entrance of the living room. In the agonizing quiet, the dry, rapid sound of paper pages turning echoed just feet away from us. Flutter, flutter, stop. A raspy, guttural whisper cut through the dark. Knock, knock. My mom gripped my hand so hard her nails dug into my skin, tears streaming down her face as we held our breath. We didn't say a word. After what felt like an eternity, a wet, wheezing laugh drifted across the room, followed by dead silence. When the streetlights outside finally flickered back to life, the doorway was empty. The next morning we tore the house apart but found nothing. Desperate for normalcy, I crept upstairs to my bedroom to pack a bag so we could stay at a hotel. My bedroom door was wide open. Resting squarely in the center of my bed was the black book. I stood frozen in the hallway as fresh black ink began to violently seep across the blank page on its own. Knock, knock. I couldn't move. I didn't speak. Another line bled furiously beneath it. Who's there? I took a terrified step backward. A final sentence tore across the paper, the ink splattering across the margins. You already answered. Bang, bang, bang. 3 massive, violent pounds slammed against the inside of my wardrobe doors, nearly ripping the hinges out of the wood frame. I ran downstairs, and right now my mom and I are locked inside the small downstairs bathroom, waiting for the police. The heavy banging upstairs suddenly stopped a minute ago. The entire house is dead quiet, except right outside the bathroom door. I can hear the slow, distinct sound of pages turning against the tile. I don't think it's looking for another joke. It's looking for us.